welcome to Clash of the Dice. In this episode I'll be taking you through how to play Kobolds and Cobblestones, published by Osprey Games. Kobolds and Cobblestones is a fantasy gang warfare skirmish type game set in the town of Ordinsport, and the rulebook goes into quite a nice bit of fictional history, bit of backstory as to the background to the game. But obviously the first thing you need to play the game is a gang, and when you start by creating a gang, first of all you've got to decide between you how big is your gang going to be. You've got different gang members, they cost different amounts of gold, and what you'll need for your gang is a gang leader, and there are 7 to choose from. There is Barry the Elf, there is the Egg Keeper, who is a kobold, there is Doric the Lone Shark, who's a dwarf, you've got Clacker, York Warboss, there's a human who is simply called the Body Snatcher, he's kind of a necromancer type dude, there's a female goblin, Groblar the Goblin Queen, and there's a Ratman who is Skreek Sewer Master. So those are your gang leaders, so you choose one of them and then you build the gang around them. They're free for your gang, they don't cost any gold at all. Now, unlike some Osprey games, there is no dedicated line of miniatures to support the game, but if you're creative enough, there's plenty of miniatures out there. Most of these guys are from Reaper miniatures. There is the odd exception. So for example, Skreek is, you'll probably recognise him as an old Games Workshop Skaven Plague Monk, but you know, to be fair, Games Workshop always have and always will probably make the best fantasy Ratmen, in my humble opinion. There are other ranges out there, but certainly Games Workshop has probably got the biggest range, certainly the ones I've come across. The Reaper miniatures are excellent for characters, really are excellent. I've modified this one a bit, so this figure you can't get like this from Reaper. I changed his hand because this is one of the Reaper Bones miniatures, so it's made of recycled plastic. And because of that, some of the bits tend to be on those miniatures tend to be a bit bendy. They're not particularly robust. And this guy originally came with a big axe, and the shaft of the axe was all bent and twisted. So I've actually replaced his hand with an old Games Workshop plastic orc hand that I had lying around. So I simply sliced it off the wrist and then stuck it in place. Likewise, the skulls don't come on the miniature. All the bits of skin and stuff on the shield do, but these bits of skull and things are stuff I've put on. The idea being, it explains in Clacker's bio that he got the name Clacker from all the skulls that he's got decorating his armour, and they clack together as he walks along. But yeah, other than that, you've got Barry the Elf, so called because nobody can actually pronounce his name, so everybody calls him Barry, which I think is quite a nice little touch. It's quite a comical feel to the to the rulebook as you read it. You've got the Egg Keeper, who is a kobold, so lizard type folk. You've got Doric the Lone Shark, who's a dwarf, as I say, and then yeah, the only human gang leader is a necromancer, so he's got the ability to create zombies and things like that, and he's kind of an undead feel to some of the gangs. And yeah, the gang leaders are fairly typical of the races in and around Ordinsport. So there's Ratmen, there's humans, there's elves, there's dwarves, there's orcs, there's goblins, there's lizard men or kobolds. Yeah, plenty to choose from, and we'll have a look a little bit more at those later on. So within the different races that you can recruit to your gang, there's different, if you like, grades. Starting with runts and going through to thugs, you've got big guys and you've got experts, and yeah, there's different types of those for most of the races. So you can get humans as runts and thugs. Your big guys are fairly self-explanatory. There's an ogre, there's a kobold gator, there's a rat brute, and then within your experts there's dwarf berserkers, there's elf fencers, there's a ratman assassin, and plenty more to choose from. So those are the different grades. If you're playing a campaign, so you're going to be using a gang over a course of several skirmishes, then you can develop those, but you can only start with runts and thugs. You have to increase the notoriety and the prestige of your gang in order to then go on to recruit things like your big guys and your experts. So Kobolds and Cobblestones is a card-driven game using a standard deck of 52 playing cards. You actually need 3 decks in total, 1 for each player plus an event deck. So it's designed for 2 players. And a typical 52 card playing card deck is divided up into 4 suits of 2 different colours. So you've got your black suits, which are your spades and your clubs, and you've got your red suits, which are your hearts and your diamonds. And the different races in the game are aligned to either red or black. And typically your stereotypical bad, evil races, so your orcs, your goblins, your rat men, your undead, they're aligned to the black suits, and your stereotypical good, in inverted commas, races of your humans, your dwarves, your elves, and also the kobolds, lizard men, they're aligned to the red suits. And that comes into play. You don't have to have one or the other in your gang. In fact, it's a good idea to have a mixture of reds and blacks, and you are allowed to do that, but obviously there might be a certain amount of antagonism between the different alliances within the gang, and that does come into play, but I'll explain that later. So as well as the different movement stats and fighting stats and things like that, obviously all of the races have got different abilities. So as you would expect, undead, your zombies and your skeletons, they can regenerate. Your kobolds, they've got a certain amount of poison resistance, well, some of them have anyway. Your elves are graceful in combat, and that gives them particular advantages. Elves have got bows, although halflings do as well. Don't currently have any halfling miniatures, but I intend to get some. I'll probably get them from Essex Miniatures. I quite like their halflings. Dwarves are particularly stubborn and tough and don't particularly like dying, so they've got abilities that reflect that. And then your rat men are particularly quick and evasive, so they've got abilities that are based around their speed and agility. And also some of the other races have got additional abilities as well, which I won't go into in any depth. So yeah, that helps to set the races apart. You are going to need 3 decks of playing cards to play this game. You want 1 for each player as their combat decks, and then a 3rd as the event deck. So initially, when you're setting up the game, you'll follow the deployment rules for the scenario that you're going to be playing, and then to draw initiative you use the event deck, and both players draw a card, and whoever draws the highest card, 10 beats a 2, gets to go first with the initiative. Right, the game uses alternating activations, so when you've set up, the player that won the initiative will make an activation with one of its models, and then the other player will make an activation with one of its models, and so on and so forth until all models have been activated. Now then, the red allegiance and the black allegiance. You can have models from either allegiance in your gang, so you can have an orc and a dwarf in your gang, which might cause a few problems. Historically, dwarves and orcs haven't always got on very well. So there is a chance that could affect how well they perform in your gang when they're actually out and about, interacting, shall we say, with other gangs. So what you do is, if you've got a character from a red alliance near to a character from the black alliance, and vice versa, at the start of their game, if they are within a card of the opposing alliance, so we've got a dwarf and this orc are pretty close together, then they are less than a card apart. You have to draw a card from the event deck. If it is a red, then the character is free to activate as usual. If it is a black, then they have a sulky hissy fit because they're begrudging against their friend in inverted commas from a rival alliance, and they refuse to do anything for that activation. And then when it comes to the next character, he's going to have to make the same test. So again, is it a red or a black? Can he activate or not? So no, the orc doesn't particularly like the dwarf, so he's going to have his hissy fit and not activate either. Just to quickly note that, as I've mentioned some of the other manufacturers, I'll mention that these two characters are from alternative armies based up in Scotland, and I quite like their figures, they're pretty good. The actions that you can take as part of a character's activation are a walk plus 2 other actions, which can either be a dash, a climb, interact, draw new cards, or attack. So dash is just another straightforward move. So your walk is a straightforward move and a dash is a second move. You can climb, although big guys like ogres and rat brutes cannot climb, but you can climb up a vertical surface equal to your move distance. You can interact with a piece of scenery, so some of the scenarios will require you to pick something up and carry it. You can draw new cards for your combat hand, which we'll come to later in the explanation in the video, or you can attack either melee or ranged. So, for example, this human, as part of his activation, can move up to this goblin for 1 action. That would be its walk, and then it can perform 2 other actions, so he could attack the goblin twice. Alternatively, this elf could move a little bit further away from the goblin if the goblin's getting a bit too close for comfort, and then it could shoot at the goblin. Obviously different races can move at different rates, and the amount that they can move is dictated by a playing card, and the game recommends you take the jokers and you use those as your movement measuring points. Now, the movement will either be L or W, length or width, and that is in relation to the playing card. So if you take a creature such as a zombie, who are traditionally slow moving, they would have a movement of W, so they can move the width of a playing card, and it is from one side of the playing card to the other, so it's not a case of the front moves to there and that's its movement, it's the entire width of the playing card. So from the front of the base to the back of the base, from there to there. Likewise, a ratman. Ratmen are traditionally pretty quick, so they can move the length of a playing card. Again, from the front of the base to the back of the base, the entire length of the playing card. And that's how movement works. It will either be length or width, depending on the race. Another circumstance where the event deck comes into play is if the character starts its activation in contact with an enemy and it wants to break away, so it doesn't want to go through combat again. So for example, this ratman might want to be breaking away from this human. So what you would do is, he can't simply run away, you would have to draw a card from the event deck, and if it's red, he is able to break away and move away from its opponent. If it draws a black card, then it can't, it's stuck there. Just to make sure nobody gets missed out, this human is from Kobolds Games, and it is from their Ancient British Warband pack. After you've created your gang, you've got yourself a gang leader and you've got yourself your gang members, you might have a few gold left over, and let's face it, whenever we play a skirmish game like this and you give them points or whatever mechanism it is to recruit your force, you've probably got a few points left over here and there. In this game you convert it into gold coins that you can use as part of the game, and you can use that for things like buying new cards for your combat hand, or you can even use it to bribe an opponent to not do a particular action. So if he wants to attack you, you can try and bribe the character to not attack you. So plenty of things you can use gold for, some neat little mechanisms in there. Moving on to combat, which is pretty much what most of us are interested in when it comes to skirmish games. There's 2 types of combat, there's ranged and there's close combat. So close combat is obviously when 2 figures are in base-to-base contact. Ranged combat is when someone is shooting at somebody with a ranged weapon such as a bow. The mechanisms are pretty much identical. There are some subtle differences with ranged combat which I won't go into in any great length here. You simply need to know that in this game there's no ranges for ranged weapons. If you can see it, you can shoot at it, and that's it. But the combat mechanism works the same in either case, and it's basically poker. At the start of each game, both players will draw 5 cards from their combat hand, plus 1 for their leadership skill. So all the gang leaders at the start of any fresh campaign or a brand new gang will have a leadership stat of 1. So it's 5 cards from your combat deck plus 1. That forms your combat hand. So here we've got a Kobold Grunt taking on a Human Bruiser. They've got a fight stat and a defense stat. The player that has moved into contact and is using an action to attack uses their fight stat, and the defending player uses the defense stat. So the defense stat for the Human Bruiser is 3, the attack stat for the Kobold Grunt is 3, so the Kobold would select 3 cards from the combat hand to form a poker hand. And it's not a case of, oh, we've got 3 cards there that form a straight, we can use a straight. That's not a straight because it's not a poker hand, it has to be a poker hand that's a straight, so it would have to be 5 cards because that's a legal hand in poker. But what we do have is 3 sixes, so we've got 3 of a kind. That is a legal poker hand, 3 of a kind. So that Kobold is using a poker hand of 3 of a kind to attack. So now onto the Human Bruiser. He's got defense stat of 3, so he can select 3 cards from his defense hand to form his defense. And again, we can't use a, say, 3, 4, 5 to make a straight because it's not a legal straight. The best we can do is a pair, or we could just go for a high card, which can be any single card. So we'll go for the pair. Now we're up against poker hands. 3 of a kind is 2 better than a pair. 1 better than a pair would be 2 pair, so 2 pair is 1 better than 1 pair. 3 of a kind is better than 2 pair, but it's 2 better than 1 pair. Now there is full explanation of this in the rule book, and it explains the gradings of the different hands. But yeah, at the moment we've got 3 of a kind is 2 types of hand better than a pair, so that inflicts wounds onto the Human Bruiser. So that would inflict 1 wound, so it's the difference in rankings minus 1 is the number of wounds, so the Human Bruiser would take 1 wound from that attack. Each character has got a number of wounds they can take, and when it gets down to the once all the wounds have been expended, then obviously he's in pretty bad shape. But that's basically how combat works. You take cards from your combat hand to make a poker hand, and you compare it against the opponent's defense hand and see who's got the best hand. Now, if we had a pair against a pair, it's not a case of 7s are better than 6s, it's a case of both players have got a pair, so they cancel each other out and the attack does nothing. Something that helps to set the different races apart, as well as its movement stats and fighting stats, is its critical abilities. Now, each type of character has got up to 4 critical abilities, and it'll either be crit 1, crit 2, crit 3 or crit 4, and those numbers are related to the number of cards it played in its attack hand that match up to its allegiance colour. So, as I say, some characters are aligned to red, some characters are aligned to black. Now, the Kobold Grunt played this attack hand, which has got 2 red cards in it. So, because it's played 2 and it is aligned to the red allegiance, we'll get rid of the black because the black doesn't count, because it's a black card, not a red card. We've used 2 red cards from our combat hand, which means we can use either our crit 1 or our crit 2 ability for the Kobold Grunt. It can't use its crit 3 or crit 4 ability because we haven't got 3 or 4 red cards. We've only got 2, so we can use crit 1 or crit 2. And those are extra impacts from the attack. So for example, it might be to kneecap an opponent. A crit 2 is sometimes a kneecap, so that means that the opposing character, as well as being physically injured and has taken wounds, it affects their ability to move. Or it could be that it's a dodge attack, so you can make kind of a hit and run. You make the attack and then you can dodge away one of your movement rates, so move backwards either a width or a length of a card depending on the character. So that's an interesting little mechanism to add on to the attack. So it's not just inflicting wounds, it's thinking about what colour cards are you going to play, as well as trying to beat the opponent's hand. Have you got the right colour cards to then inflict extra damage or make extra moves? So it's a clever little mechanism to add into it. While we're talking about crits and critical abilities, I'll let you in on a mistake that there is in the rulebook in relation to this chap, the Rat Brute. On page 15 and page 40 it says that the Rat Brute's crit 4 ability is Broken Bones. Now you will not find anywhere in the rulebook an explanation of what Broken Bones is. So I queried this with Osprey, and in fairness they came back to me pretty quick and they said that they'd been in touch with the author and it was a mistake at time of printing. It should have been changed to Nasty Sprain. So the Rat Brute's crit 4 ability, according to Osprey, is Nasty Sprain, not Broken Bones. So moving on to magic, there are magic users that you can use in the game, but there is only effectively one type. So there's an orc shaman is no different to an elf mage, who is no different to a human druid. They're all magic users. They don't have an alliance either to red or black. They are effectively neutral. Now magic in the game is represented by blackjack, and it uses the event deck rather than each player's combat deck. So there's two types of magic you can use. You're either going to be casting an attack spell, or you're going to be casting a support spell. Now casting an attack spell will inflict damage on an enemy character. Casting a support spell will try to heal wounds off a friendly character. Now in either case you need to have line of sight to the target. If you haven't got line of sight, then you can't cast the spell. There's no range, it's literally line of sight. If you can see it, you can use the spell. So if you're going to cast an attack spell, the defending player draws cards from the event deck, and like I say, it's a game of blackjack. So you draw a card, and you draw another card. So right now we've got 12, and then you draw another card. That'll be 18, and now you need to decide whether you're going to stick or try your luck a little bit further to try and get perfect 21. So we draw another card, it's a 5, we've gone bust. So that's not good for the defending player. So for now we'll just leave it as 18. So that is then the target score for the attacker, who then draws cards. We've got a 9, we've got a 10, so that's 19. 19 easily beats 18, well easily, beats it by 1. So the attacking player has succeeded, so you then look on a table to work out what the damage is on the defending player. If the defender had gone bust, it's nice and easy for the attacker because the defender has then got a target score of 0. So there's going to be a lot of damage inflicted on the target. If the score for the attacker was exactly the same, then there's no effect. If the score was lower, then we quit before we go bust. 15 does not beat 18, so there's no damage. If the attacking player goes bust, then there is the chance that the attacking wizard has damaged itself, because magic is dangerous stuff to be messing around with. So if the attacking player goes bust, then yeah, there's a chance that his wizard is now going to be in a bad way, and you consult tables to work out what the damage is. There is still critical effects, like there is in a regular attack, but that purely uses black cards, and if you think of it as black magic, then yeah, that helps you work out whether or not you can use a critical effect from it. So if we use the 18, we've got one black card in there, we use what is effectively a crit 1 ability, but there are specific abilities for magic users which are separate to the crits for typical racers. Support spells work slightly differently. Rather than the defending player having to draw cards from the event deck, this is all about the player in question, the activating player, trying to heal a hit on its own character. So there's no opposing player involved, it's purely down to the one player. So whoever's turn it is, whoever is the magic user, the player controlling the magic user, they draw 2 cards from the event deck. So that's nice and simple, it's a 6. So that's the target score you have to beat. So then you keep drawing cards. So we've got a queen and a 3, so that's 13. So 13 is higher than 6, so we could safely stop there, and then we consult a chart to work out how many hits we've healed off our little buddy. Or we can keep going. But again, if we go bust, so that's now 22, it's magic, there's a chance that the magic user has actually damaged themselves. so because they've gone bust. So again, you can sort a table to work out what the damage is. Some of the equipment you can buy includes magic crystals, and they help with your spellcasting abilities. And for every magic crystal that you can have a maximum of 5 in each game. That reduces, if you happen to go bust when you're casting a spell, it reduces your final score by 1 for each crystal you have. So if you've gone, say you've drawn 22, you could use 1 magic crystal to reduce it down to 21 again. So that's a basic overview of the key mechanisms within the game. Obviously the rulebook covers a lot more detail as to how you build a gang, what you can spend your money on, the more specific intricacies of combat, so additional factors such as ganging up on an opponent, having multiple opponents, and some additional factors for shooting. So you do have to see a target, but you don't have to see the entirety of the target, but you do need to see some of it, and things like that. They're all covered in the rule book, and I won't describe all of those little tiny details in detail. You will obviously need the rule book in order to get all the statistics for the different races, but yeah, it's a relatively simple skirmish game, and I hope that gives you a feel for how it works. So that's the basics on how the game works. My thoughts on the game itself: I think it's interesting because it's card based rather than dice based. It's not the only card-based game out there, but there's not a lot out there, and it's interesting in that you're using the cards for combat as well as for movement, so all of your movement distances are measured in either card widths or card lengths, other than for shooting. Shooting is line of sight. If you can see it, you can shoot at it, which is interesting. Again, interesting. You can use that word interesting a lot, I think. Yeah, it's simply different. It's a fantasy setting. It's not overly fantasy themed, other than the fact that you've got the different races. There's not an awful lot of magic goes on in it. I sometimes wonder though that is the fantasy theme right for the mechanisms, because you're talking about poker, you're talking about blackjack. Those are the 2 main mechanisms in the game. So if you can understand poker and blackjack, you can pretty much play the game. But would a Wild West theme have been more appropriate to it, I wonder? It's just a thought. But yeah, on the whole, it's, you know, it is what it is. I don't think it's a very complete game because, I mean, terrain. You're either fighting on the streets and you've got buildings and things like that, and all you do is move around them. That's pretty much all the terrain does. It's obstacles for you to move around. There's different scenarios in it, so in that respect it bulks it out a bit, but the game is supposed to be set in a town called Ordinsport, and in Ordinsport it's supposed to be a big river that goes through the middle of it. And what I would have liked in my terrain pack would be to build in Ordinsport River, maybe with some bridges going over, because there are a few bridges. Again, the background of the game is explained quite fully in the rulebook, so it's got a nice bit of history to it, a nice bit of you know, fictional background to it, which is interesting reading. But yeah, I would have liked the ability to punch somebody and knock them backwards into the river. And maybe they can get washed away or they can swim out, but that mechanism isn't in there. As I say, terrain is blocks that you move around, that's it. So I don't feel it's a very complete game, but it's a reasonably enjoyable one. It's quite complete in the sense that you have got the different scenarios that you can work through. You can play as a campaign, you can develop your gang and increase their stats, give them extra loot and extra equipment, things like that. So in that respect, it's good, and you can play a campaign. But yeah, I don't feel it's quite 100% finished item. There is the problem with the Rat Brute's ability, the misprint in the rule book. But credit where credit's due. You asked them the question, they gave you an answer. So yeah, it's not a bad game. It's one I look forward to playing properly. And yeah, hopefully we'll get some back reps up for you to watch. But that's the game. Yeah, see what you think, have a go. In the meantime, yeah, thanks for watching. Please continue to like, comment and subscribe. In the meantime, God bless.